I'm Evelyn Tucker. I teach at Yale at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, as well as the Divinity School and Religious Studies. So there's a joint program here between these different departments in religion and ecology. My background is the study of Asian traditions, religions, culture, history, and that happened because I left the US to study and teach in Japan in 73, 74. And I was trying to get out of the political morass of the 60s, a very intense time here, civil rights, anti-Vietnam War. And I went to teach at a college in Japan that really changed my life because we didn't have a lot of studies of Asia at that time. We still don't have enough. But I began to see, of course, how other cultures have their worldviews, their cosmologies, their religious systems. And that became very exciting to me. I traveled all through Asia at that time. In the 70s, it was very different than it is now. Most places not industrialized or developed. But I began then in coming back to the States and studying with Thomas Berry, who's the teacher of Sean Grimm, my husband and myself. And he had a tremendous understanding of these different world religions, but he also had a sense of the urgency of our environmental crisis. And so we began to think together, John and myself and Thomas Berry. We're not scientists, policy people, economists, technologically literate people for the environment or lawyers. So we said, what can we contribute? And we began this series of conferences at Harvard on the world's religions and ecology. And that was to say the ethics, the values of India, of China, Japan, Africa, Latin America, Europe, all over the world. These are very different cultural takes on how we value the environment. So that's what that conference series was about in the mid-90s, and a whole 10 volumes came out of that series on world religions and ecology. First, after the conference series from 95 to 98, we did a culminating conferences in New York at the United Nations and at the Natural History Museum there. And at the UN in 98, we announced the Forum on Religion and Ecology to bring forward the 800 scholars and environmentalists who had helped shape these conferences. And then we began to work on the books and to say, okay, we're going to create a field within academia to take these ethical values, environmental ethics, and so on more seriously. But we also wanted to create a force in the larger society, engage projects on the ground for water protection, for forests, for fisheries, and so on. In a sense also of environmental justice, how poor people are often in the front lines of these environmental problems, air pollution, and so on. So then, it was a number of years later, we finished the books in about 2004, editing this 10-volume series with help from many, many people. And in 2006, Gus Speth invited us to Yale because he said, and Gus Speth was a founder of Natural Resources Defense Council, the legal arm of the environment. He founded World Resources Institute, one of the great policy institutes in Washington. And he was the chief administrator for UN Development Program. And then he came back here to Yale, where he had graduated, and was head of our School of the Environment, the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And he said to us the same thing. He said, I've been working in the environment all these years, especially policy and law, and we are not far enough along after 40 years of this work, and very good work, but we're missing something. And that was this, where's the human soul? Where's the heart? Where's the transformational possibilities? Not just in the mind, it's not just technological solutions, even business, all of these are necessary but not sufficient. So he brought us here, created this joint program between the Divinity School and Forestry School. And that's when the Forum on Religion and Ecology got really embedded in Yale. And we have a very robust website on all the world's religions, a lot of news happening, call for papers and conferences. So it's a very active program. the religious communities can play an important role as stewards of the environment, as caretakers, and so on. And that's why we're trying to work these two areas. One is we're trying to say, how can the religions move forward? How can we retrieve, reevaluate, and reconstruct the texts and traditions of all the world's religions? That, for example, in seminaries, how can we look at Genesis and the idea of dominion over nature? Or should be interpreted as stewardship, as care? And that's what the theologians are helping work on. And the same with ethicists in these different traditions. How can we say ethics are not just for humans, we're not just an anthropocentric species, but we're an earth-based species. We're living in an earth community. So we need to widen the ethics from all these traditions. And then we're saying the engaged projects where the traction really is happening is something we want to identify, lift up, because these are often groups that have no money, no power, and so on. The dispossessed, if you will, and this includes indigenous peoples all over the world who are calling for protection of their lands, tropical forests, traditional environmental knowledge, and they're saying there's an intrinsic value of land, of forests, of species, and so on. So that's the added value here. And we want to ensure that their voices are strongly heard. Standing Rock, which was in North Dakota, was a major point of convergence over a pipeline that could have affected their water on their reservation. So coming from their sense that water is life, that the earth is sacred, that all future generations are counting on us to hold that up. So again, this value of a living earth community is something that they highlighted. They used rituals, nonviolence. The young people were hugely involved in starting it and continuing it. People gathered, native peoples from all over the North American continent and beyond, and many, many other groups, religious groups and non-environmental groups, non-religious groups and environmental groups joined them. It was the largest gathering in modern history of native peoples. So those are, just a couple examples, and we could go on and on with Buddhist monks protecting forests in Southeast Asia and so on and so forth. In India, people taking from the temples offerings of seedlings and planting them, reforestation. So this is the action, the theory and the action, the ideas and the practice. And I think a lot is happening, a lot still needs to be done, but there's a lot of promise here. Environmental ethics has been developing for the last 40 plus years from the position of philosophy, and generally Western philosophy. So the philosophers, in their very talented way, very cerebral way, if you will, have been arguing, well, how can we value nature? Because humans are the center usually of ethics in the Western tradition. And so they're saying, well, can nature be used instrumentally for humans? Or is there an intrinsic value in nature, which is what indigenous peoples would say, and many religious communities? So it's our view that, again, this is necessary but not sufficient to have just a philosophical approach to environmental ethics. That works in academia, and these are interesting classes and ideas and lots of publication. But even one of the founders of environmental ethics, whose name is Baird Callicott, and he's written many, many books, and he came to us years ago and said, the traction has to be with religions and other groups that are actually practicing this, not just thinking about it abstractly. So that's, again, the possibility here to say that ethics are changing in a whole range of ways. And we now have the rights of nature, for example, and that's coming up from indigenous worldviews. In New Zealand, a river has been given rights, even here in the US, in Toledo, because their water system was completely polluted by algae of Lake Erie. They're trying to say Lake Erie has rights of rivers in India, the Yamuna and Ganges. So there's a new movement of earth-based ethics. And I'll just give one final example of that. The Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Nature came out of Bolivia in a gathering of 30,000 people, largely indigenous, in Cochabamba, a city that had argued over the politicalization of water. And that sense that all of nature has rights, that document went all the way to the UN because the president of the General Assembly was from Venezuela, and he brought that document to the UN General Assembly. They voted on it and passed it. So that is a really new opening, isn't it, about the value and rights of Mother Earth. We founded the forum a little over 20 years ago at the UN, as I mentioned, and the conferences preceded that. So this field and force is maybe 25 years old. It's not that old, but we now have in academia, both colleges and high schools even, courses on religion and ecology, a new sense of appreciation that this cultural moral force is absolutely necessary. We've got to study it, we've got to examine it and bring it forward, because this is how people change. It's not just the mind, it's the heart mind. So we've seen that change in academia. We've seen seminaries who are training ministers and so on, encouraging this point of view, lots of lectures across universities and seminaries on this. And certainly we've seen an explosion in the publication of books. It's quite amazing. If you look on our Forum on Religion and Ecology website, fore.yale.edu, you can see bibliographies of all the world's religions. They're annotated and so on. Articles and books and journals. It's astounding, actually. And there's now publications from journals. There's 2 journals in the fields. There's all kinds of conferences happening all throughout the year. But again, most importantly, I think, are people working on the ground without being necessarily thanked or noticed or reported on, but they're working because they believe inherently. They don't need the academic world to say, this is their homeland, this is their heartland, this is where their ancestors are buried, this is what they value. And they value a healthy earth systems for their children and future generations. In India right now, the droughts are unbelievable. So Chiang Mai in the south, a city of 5 million people, is running out of water. I mean, this is going to happen, as we know, because of climate change and whatnot. But humans are beginning to push back and saying, Mother Earth is speaking to us. We've got to reciprocate and realize there's no healthy people on a sick planet. It's almost as simple as that. It's quite touching, actually, because we are doing this for future generations. We don't have children, but we feel our students are our children, next generation are. We like to think of an intergenerational handshake, so that when people like you and your fellow graduates from UConn can see why this matters, it's a great joy and a great sense of hope to us, you see, so that we're not just talking to our generation or people kind of stuck in their ways. And we know, I really want to put into this mix, religions have their problems. That's how we like to begin, the problems and the promise. And we know that many younger people and people our age too are kind of disillusioned with religions for all kinds of reasons, and rightly so. We are too. In fact, we're not saying these are perfect institutions, but what we're trying to do is crack open the fossilized, institutionalized dimensions of these sources of wisdom and say, let's go back and drink at the well. Let's go back and feel the wellspring and bring forward from the Vedic tradition of India, from the Confucian and Taoist texts, from the Buddhist texts. What has inspired people through millennia to say we are part of human communities and earth communities, and that's how all of our life will thrive and survive. So when we see traction, it's a great, great joy and a sense of hope for us. So the workshop in Rhodes was quite extraordinary. And in part because there were students from UConn and elsewhere, to have the younger people there was very, very important. I actually celebrated my 70th birthday, and the whole birthday dinner was with young people. And I was thrilled, because these were people we had invited from Judaism and Christianity and Islam and studying water system. And just to see them engaged and alive and thriving, because hope is at a minimum, for people, because people who are awake realize we're really at a very critical point. And that's why this conference was a source of re-empowerment between the generations, between the disciplines, people working in religion and ethics and values, but people working on water systems, helping the Jordan River to flow again with the 3 Abrahamic traditions working carefully on that eco-peace and their remarkable work. Reforestation in Morocco, and so on. So there are a lot of specific projects there and people and think tanks from Jordan, from Oman, from Morocco, people, again, who want to rethink the scientific, somewhat reductionistic approach. And of course that's needed, and we need the technologies of desalinization, especially in that region. Water is so critical. But I think the conference and the leadership of Dan Wiener and his team, Zara Ali and so on from UConn, was remarkable. And the persistence against great odds to say these traditions have shared a history in the region and beyond, texts, an Abrahamic source, Abraham himself. How can we say we are part of a shared lineage, ancient and modern, old and new, and what is bringing us together for this region and for the peoples of this region and for their children? That's what this conference was holding up. The conference was remarkable in that it did bring together people from very different traditions, even though they share a great deal too of monotheism and love and charity and forgiveness and so on. But we know historically, especially in the modern period, this has been very contested. And there are people at great risk for their lives and livelihood in the region because of oppression, of inequities, injustices, and so on, militarisms. It was very, very moving because this was the first conference we had helped to do with Danny, certainly, but it was the first conference we had helped with in terms of these traditions. We've done a lot with the Asian traditions, a lot with indigenous traditions, but because it's so complicated and contested, we hadn't done something with the Abrahamic traditions. So it was deeply moving. Many people had not been in the same room with a Jew or Muslim even because of this separation. We know Christians in the region have been moving out, and that's a whole other story. But how we can reconstitute our sense we are humans, we can only live with water and earth and food systems growing from this land, and we can only live with a sense that there's no future without a shared future. It's all of the children that really matter. And that was the spirit in that room, for sure. The transcended differences. It was amazing. I think the connections that were made there will continue to play themselves out in ways we don't even know yet. It's very mysterious when you meet a person and they affect you, and hopefully it's quite mutual. That was the feeling in that room. So friendships make things happen. The personal connections make things happen. And I think the think tanks that are on the horizon and already working in that region will pick up some of these ideas, as I mentioned, Oman, Jordan, Morocco, and certainly Yukon. I think one of the most wonderful things that actually happened was the head of Faith for Earth, which is under the umbrella of UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, based in Nairobi, an initiative within the leading environmental program in the world. So Iyad Abu Mogli was there, who heads this up, Faith for Earth. And he realized that our Forum on Religion and Ecology website at Yale could be a complement to, a supplement to, what they have on the science and ecology. So we have a new partnership that's emerging with UNEP and the Forum's website. And that's tremendously exciting and very practical, real. There's a number of ways we're trying to do it, of course, is education through seminaries, so that seminaries and ministers and rabbis and so on will bring it to their congregations. That's one very practical way. We've been working on the greening of seminaries for almost 20 years. And certainly education, public talks and summer sessions and all kinds of things like that we're working on as well. Very specifically, we have online classes on religion and ecology that we are teaching here at Yale. And we want to, so the students watch the programs and then we discuss it in class. And we want to bring those out to a larger public through Coursera and Yale, a joint venture, so to speak, on online classes. And finally, we already have some of these online classes for what our other big project is called Journey of the Universe. And that's a film, it's a book, it's a series of interviews I did, conversations. And those are 3 classes that are now online. And about 24,000 people are watching them and participating in them. So that's how we're trying to bring this out further. We worked for 10 years, actually. My husband, John Grimm, Brian Swim, a scientist and cosmologist, and a whole team, of course, of filmmakers, to create a film called Journey of the Universe, which was filmed on Samos in Greece, a beautiful island near the coast of Turkey, crossroads of civilization, Greek, Persian, all the way from China, part of the Silk Road, and so on. So we wanted to have this sense of an island in the Mediterranean, but in Earth systems and in cosmic systems, kind of this concentric circles out from Greece to resonate with nature and even the cosmos. We filmed there over 3 different visits. And then we did a book that Yale published, and as I say, interviews with scientists and environmentalists to say, how does an epic story of evolution relate to both the awe and wonder of understanding the processes from galaxy formations to Earth system formation and plate tectonics and volcanic processes all the way down to the cell and atom and the explosion of life forms? How does this create a sense of belonging? Because we know we've come out of these systems. So it awakens new sensibilities of wonder, of awe, which gives us an energy for the work that needs to be done to protect and care for these systems. So that's one of the reasons why we did it. And the film won an Emmy, and it's done well. But we also want to spark discussion, to say we're at an urgent moment. What is it we're going to do? It's not to say this is the path or the way, but it's a context in which we can kind of sink into, breathe into deep time, and to say these systems emerged out of their own conflict and even destructive powers. So creativity and destruction are working throughout the galactic and Earth systems and even biological systems. And so social systems have that same tension of creation and things emerging and destruction and things being destroyed. We're at this huge moment of loss of biodiversity, and it's deeply heartrending for the human. So how we navigate that sense that this has been happening for 14 billion years or for 4.6 billion years of Earth evolution. So we are going through an hourglass of extinction. This is a 6th extinction period. So how will we take this moment of tension of creativity and destruction into new social systems, new economic systems, new political systems that will allow the creativity of the next generation to emerge and shape something that's more equitable, more just, more real, more possible, much more inclusive of the diversity of the tremendous numbers of people in this country and elsewhere who want to participate in these life systems. We are at a very critical moment in human history. We know that somehow in our hearts. We don't even need the news to tell us that, but we are living with a lot of sad, bad news. It's very hard to live with that news for young people and older people, believe me, which is why we like to say there's an intergenerational handshake between those of us who are older and younger. And we want to open up these well springs of creativity that young people have for change, for justice, for peace, for ecological restoration. And as Thomas Berry would say, there's a great work for each person to do, to contribute on all these scales of change. Whatever you contribute, however you find your role in law, in education, in business, in the arts, and so on. Whatever it is, raising a family, loving the animal world, the forest world, etc. Bring your love forward for your great work to contribute to our still flourishing Earth community.